welcome you here today on our grand public opening. And also thank you for turning out to our special edition of 360 today, starting a bit earlier than we normally do, and extending a little bit longer than we typically do as well. But what we have planned is something that I think is very fitting for the ambition of this particular exhibition. The exhibition, of course, covers an area of the work of many well-known artists, but the work of these artists in this particular medium is not so well known. It's the ceramic sculpture of Lucio Fontana, Fausto Melotti, Miró, Isamu Noguchi, and Pablo Picasso, and it looks specifically at the period right after World War II from about 1943 to 1963. And I think if you had a chance to maybe peek into the galleries this morning before you came to the auditorium, you get a sense of the kind of radical nature of these works of art. It is extraordinary to think that for many of these artists that are so well known for painting and other kinds of sculpture, that these works have largely gone unsung for much of their careers. Yet all of these artists have had a significant engagement with the material and extensive bodies of work in fired clay. The work also engages a number of traditions: the ceramic tradition, the sculptural, the tradition of avant-garde sculpture, and I think gently turns both of those on their heads. We have today, at least this morning, we'll be fortunate enough to hear from the authors of the catalog essays for the Return to Earth catalog. And then this afternoon, we'll break for lunch, and this afternoon we will have a panel discussion that will be a view from today with a number of artists who are working in the material today and the impact that these works have had on them, and of course the state of working in ceramics today. To start off the morning, we have, and I should also say that this is a bit of a homecoming for the Nasher Sculpture Center. You'll notice a thread running through the introductions, the biographies of the speakers this morning. All of them currently have or have had a significant connection to the Nasher Sculpture Center. And the first speaker this morning, Marin Sullivan, has in the past has held a number of positions at the Nasher Sculpture Center. The last of which was working as a curatorial fellow with me when we started thinking about this exhibition 3 years ago. Marin has since gone on to receive her PhD from the University of Michigan, and she is now currently the Henry Moore Foundation Post-doctoral Fellow in the Department of Art History at the University of Leeds. And we are fortunate enough to have her associated with this exhibition, and we get to hear from her to talk about the ceramic work of Lucio Fontana and Fausto Melotti in the context of post-war Italy. So please welcome Marin Sullivan.
So as Jed mentioned, it is absolutely, it feels like coming home. I started my career here at the Nasher, and I have to extend great thanks to Jed and everybody on staff. It's been just lovely to be back. I thought today, since we now have access to these really incredible pieces of ceramics just in the gallery behind us, that I would focus a little bit more today on the historical context in which these objects were made. In an interview from 1970, 2 years after Fontana's death, Melotti reflected on their 40-year friendship, asserting that while they progressed through their careers on divergent but parallel paths, they were connected by a mutual, quote, conviction that art is not born already shaped or forged in the material, but born in the mind, end quote. Melotti recollected how he watched Fontana on the eve of World War II leave for another world, and knew when he greeted his friend at the dock in Geneva in 1947 that he had come back with clear ideas. Fontana had indeed returned to Italy, armed with his radical theory of spatialism, which sought to create a new art invigorated by an embrace of new technologies and scientific discoveries. Fontana and his fellow spatialists declared in one of their numerous manifestos, quote, "What is needed is a change in essence and in form. What is needed is the transcending of painting, of sculpture, of poetry, and of music. We need a greater art that is in accord with the demands of the new spirit," end quote. Fontana and Melotti made significant contributions to art and design in the post-war period, creating a visual language in dialogue with the new spirit of the atomic age. They each developed distinctive personal styles, creating unique forms and approaches across a wide range of media. But in the wake of World War II, they predominantly worked in and innovated through ceramics. Both moved seamlessly between abstraction and figuration, rough and smooth handling, large and small scales, raw and glazed surfaces. Neither was concerned with the specialized techniques and refined formulaic aesthetics of traditional ceramics. Instead, they both accentuated the tactility of clay while extending its physical presence in time and space through the surface effects of their glazes, though each forged divergent paths in order to achieve such results. Melotti's ceramics, no matter the vibrancy of their glazes or the largeness of their forms, retain a quiet intimacy and delicate lyricism. In comparison, Fontana's ceramics are bombastic, muddled masses exploding off of walls, floors, and tabletops, a deluge of matter, massive in force regardless of its physical dimensions. These differences are reflective of the unique temperaments of each artist, as well as the greater historical context. But their work collectively demonstrates the range of experimental possibilities embedded within the material of clay. The post-war ceramics of Fontana and Melotti collapsed boundaries between painting and sculpture, using the immediacy and malleability of clay to synthesize space and time in a new age of possibilities. Lucio Fontana and Fausto Melotti were born within 3 years of each other at the turn of the 20th century. They first met in 1928 as fellow sculpture students in Milan and remained close until Fontana's death in 1968. Their careers spanned an especially volatile period in Italian history, stretching from the rise of fascist rule to the emergence of Italy as an established industrialized nation. While 1945 marks a significant turning point in the development of a modern Italy, the cultural context of the country in the post-war period was a complex mixture of continuity and change. Fontana and Melotti launched their artistic careers during the Ventennio, the roughly 20 years of fascist rule that began in 1922. They created their first ceramic works in this period, which coincided with the flourishing of ceramic production in Italy that lasted until the 1960s. Artists associated with Futurism, the Italian avant-garde movement that thrived during World War I, and sculptors like Arturo Martini frequently created ceramic pieces in the years between the two world wars. In the early 1930s, Melotti worked for the Richard Ginori Company, a ceramic manufacturer run at the time by Gio Ponti, the Italian architect and founder of Domus magazine. In 1937, Fontana worked at the Sèvres porcelain factories in France and learned most of his technical knowledge in the late 1930s from Tullio Mazzotti, whose father, Giuseppe Mazzotti, established a commercial ceramic studio in the Italian Riviera town of Abisola in 1903. Each artist took a different path during the war years. Fontana left for his native Argentina just prior to the country's entry into World War II, while Melotti spent the early 1940s working on a large sculptural group for Mussolini's E42 complex before returning to Milan in 1943 to find his studio badly damaged from Allied bombings. Melotti operated in relative isolation until the end of the war, working almost exclusively with clay. His choice of material owed much to the dire economic conditions, but clay also provided therapeutic tactile immediacy and a physical means to work through the traumas of the war. He stated, quote, "I have to confess that the war upset me very much. You can't even think about making abstract art when there's something inside of your soul that I'm not saying leads toward desperation, but towards figures of desperation," end quote. And I think if you notice in the galleries, the big kind of gaping gashes and holes in Fontana's work, I think that's very much representative of those types of emotions he talks about a lot in interviews. Fontana and Melotti's disparate wartime experiences unavoidably altered the trajectory of their work. But together they became pioneers of Italian avant-garde art and design in the post-war period. Bolstered by the influx of foreign aid, Italy experienced a period of great economic growth and prosperity after World War II, known as the Miracolo Italiano, or the Italian miracle. Although the push towards modernization had begun during the Fascist era, the country rushed to catch up with other developed nations, prompting mass migration of the populace from the south to the north to meet labor needs, an increase in the consumption of mass-produced consumer goods, and a radical transformation of the cultural landscape. And I think the Fiat 500s are a kind of great symbol of Italian modernization. The changes helped shape Italian post-war modernism and supported the maturation of Italian industrial design, which came to global prominence in the 1950s and 60s. Against the backdrop of both rapid industrialization and increased artistic freedom in the wake of fascism's collapse, the return to clay became a crucial, if perhaps unexpected, piece in the redefinition of modern art in Italy. Ceramics paradoxically expressed a new, uniquely Italian modernism by accessing the long, rich tradition of artisanal ceramic craftsmanship that included Etruscan terracotta, classical manifestations from antiquity, and the polychrome masterworks of the Renaissance exemplified in the work of Luca della Robbia. Whether through traditional craft forms like vases or plates, or more overtly sculptural, non-utilitarian pieces, ceramics in post-war Italy offered avenues for formal experimentation and the opportunity to engage with everyday contemporary life. Fontana and Melotti successfully challenged and blurred the distinctions between fine art practice and the often debased category of commercial ceramic endeavors. Beneath this explosive, innovative moment in Italian culture, however, there existed an anxiety over the advancement of Italian modernism, a fear that progress would come at the cost of traditional workmanship. Industrialization brought economic prosperity and numerous opportunities for designers and artists, but it also generated serious cultural debates on the relevancy of craft, art, and the modes of their production in the new economy. The goal of leading Italian cultural figures like Gio Ponti was to convince both artistic practitioners and the general public of the benefits of a new all-encompassing modern lifestyle. Ponti's vision of Italian modernism combined the vaunted exclusive realm of fine art with the rapidly changing space and substance of everyday life. He turned Domus into a leading design publication during this time, using its pages to promote the virtues of Italian art and design to an international audience, as well as to educate its domestic readers about good taste and the beauty in every aspect of their lives, from the new glass and steel skyscrapers in Milan to consumer products like Fiat 500s or Olivetti typewriters to the ashtrays, vases, and works of art in their homes. Ponti became an ardent supporter of post-war Italian ceramics, which he saw as vibrant and courageous avant-garde art forms, arguing that the Italian painters and sculptors created, quote, a happy marriage between the ceramic art and modern artists, end quote. Ponti's public, enthusiastic support for Fontana and Melotti's ceramics helped raise the reputation of both artists, whose output in the post-war period was extensive and diverse. While beginning as private, internalized pursuits or studio-based experiments, their post-war ceramics became very public symbols of Italian modernism. Fontana and Melotti produced ceramics ranging from public architectural elements to sculptural objects to vases and other domestic goods. Both artists participated in numerous Milan triennial exhibitions, and Ponti devoted ample coverage to Fontana and Melotti's ceramics in the pages of Domus, as well as his other publication, Stile, between 1946 and 1961. And you're seeing just a spread here that was from 1948 of Melotti's work. For example, Domus prominently featured a color reproduction of Fontana's large-scale ceramic commission for the Cinema Arlecchino in Milan on its cover, and in a lengthy spread about the newly renovated movie theater. And the frieze, that is the detail on the bottom, you can see just below the screen at the front, which is a really great place to view ceramics. In addition to the Cinema Arlecchino project, Fontana completed numerous small and large-scale ceramic commissions visible in the public domain in the real lived spaces of modern urban Italy. He created private ceramic sculptures to adorn cemetery plots at the Monumental Cemetery of Milan, interior schemes for private residences, and collaborated with architects tasked with rebuilding Milan in the aftermath of World War II bombings. One of Fontana's largest architectural projects was the creation of textural and graphic ceramic panels for the facade of the new building at 11 Via Senato, designed by the architect Marco Zanusso. Melotti likewise produced significant ceramic commissions, frequently collaborating with Ponti on his architectural projects. In 1958, Melotti contributed large ceramic sculptural elements to Ponti's Alitalia ticket office in New York, as well as various sizes of glazed ceramic tiles that blanketed the walls of the space. Ponti also featured Melotti's as well as Fontana's ceramics in his cruise ship commissions, which I just love. One of them is still, it's sunk in the middle of the Atlantic, so maybe the Nasher needs to start a deep sea expedition and recover the Fontana and Melotti. So you can see the Melotti just in the middle of this image. Melotti's most extensive commission, however, was for Ponti's Villa Planchard, a single-family home in Caracas. Ceramic tiles saturated the open patio space located at the center of the structure, and massive vertical strips of colored rectangles recalling dominoes with their circle-punctuated surfaces covered the sole wall in the space. In between these ceramic rows, Melotti interspersed thousands of variously sized ceramic circles, creating a dynamic texture that continues through to the interior space of the house. The ceramic cladding dominates the wall between the central staircase, broken up by two large ceramic figures. Fontana and Melotti's prolonged personal and professional involvement with Ponti suggests they supported his vision of Italian modernism. They expressed, verbally and through their work, a similar desire to advance modern art and to contribute to the cultural capital of post-war Italy. Domestically and as an international export, but crucial to both endeavors was the need to redefine the parameters of ceramics. Their work in clay undeniably provided a decent and stable source of income for both men, but neither Fontana nor Melotti want to be classified as a ceramic artist. They worked hard to distinguish their practices from traditional artisanship or high quality, but mass-produced utilitarian objects. Melotti, especially in interviews from later in his career, expressed uneasiness not so much with working in clay, but with the commercial connotations that came with such pursuits. He acknowledged that his success with ceramics provided a very good living for him and his family, but he felt ashamed because asking a sculptor to make ceramics was like asking a poet to write advertisements. Fontana likewise had consistently distinguished the artistic and commercial aspects of his ceramic work. In his essay, La mia ceramica, My Ceramics, a text he published in 1939 shortly before departing for Argentina, he wrote, quote, "I am a sculptor, not a ceramicist. I have never turned on a plate or painted a vase. I detest the lacy designs and dainty nuances. People call my ceramics primeval. The material looked as if it had been hit by an earthquake, yet was motionless. Critics called these ceramics. I called them sculpture," end quote. Fontana and Melotti's ceramics, however, even when embracing the quotidian practicalities of domestic objects or moving outside the space of the gallery, always remained firmly entrenched in the rarefied sphere of high art. Fontana insisted that his ceramics achieved the level of fine art because they were monotypes, unique objects directly and carefully modeled by the artist. Melotti frequently denied the functionality of his more overtly commercial objects like vases by making them too large to be practical for a typical consumer, or by blocking the ability to insert anything into the vessel by pinching the clay together towards the top. The point for both was not to make artistic ceramics or useful sculptures, but to merge the best aspects of both in the creation of a new Italian modern artistic language. The populism embedded in the critical and artistic conceptualization of post-war Italian ceramics, in the merging of art and design, did have its limits. Ponti's audience was not the average Italian, but a combination of the international cultural elite and the new upper and middle classes that expanded during Italy's economic miracle. An educated, urban population enthusiastic about technological innovation, highly designed consumer products, and overall cultural literacy. The lifestyle presented in Domus was, for the most part, aspirational at best, and the majority of Fontana and Melotti's ceramics remained accessible only to the top echelon of Italian society. While Ponti's intentions were no doubt sincere, and both Fontana and Melotti genuinely wanted to dismantle established artistic conventions, they viewed as out of touch with the contemporary life and engage a wider public. The outcome of their great experiment was the establishment of a highly advanced formal language that inspired subsequent generations of artists, architects, and designers. And I just wanted to include this image on the right here. It's an article from Domus with the title, which as it translates is, Picasso embraced ceramics, but Lucio Fontana says, we did it first. And this whole article is pretty much attacking Picasso, who's pictured in the middle of the upper right photograph. He didn't do it. Fontana did. So I'm sure Jed will have something to say about that. And taken. And then the photograph on the left, I also wanted to include too. The small ceramic pieces you actually see embedded on all of the walls were made by a company called Joo, J-O-O. And they're all these little ceramic buttons. And he used these on facades of Ponti for his architectural projects, used them for interiors and on the claddings of outside buildings. So you can see just kind of how pervasive ceramics was in post-war Italy. The early 1960s marked the cessation of both Fontana and Melotti's work in clay. Both artists embraced modern industrial materials and became increasingly interested in large-scale projects and environmental installations, tendencies that came to characterize much of the vanguard and experimental art in the later post-war period. Their respective contributions for Italia 61, the massive international exhibition and trade fair in Turin that coincided with the centenary of Italy's unification, serve as both a kind of triumphant culmination of the utopian ceramic experiment of the post-war period and an announcement of new things to come. Fontana showed his Fonti d'Energia, the sources of energy on the left, a neon piece that hung on the ceiling, while Melotti's commissioned installation of 800 ceramic tiles, each measuring 50 by 70 centimeters high, was located just around the corner. And this is Melotti's piece as well. Each of the individual panels were comprised of abstract forms, but were meant to illustrate a different facet of the evolution of form in craftwork, the theme given to Melotti by the exhibition's organizers. The work became a highlight of Italia 61, receiving ample coverage in the pages of Domus, of course, and even making the cover of the international version of Life magazine. Melotti's wall of tiles, especially in conjunction with Fontana's ephemeral, immersive installation, also stands as a visual closing argument, attesting to the achievements of post-war Italian artists to merge ceramics and, more broadly, design and everyday materials with avant-garde practice. In the 1940s and 50s, clay provided something tangible and familiar in a moment that must have felt both exhilaratingly wide open and terrifyingly uncertain. With the passage of another 20 years, however, the world had again changed. And Italian artists, like their international colleagues, slowly moved away from ceramic work. For avant-garde artists of the mid and late 1960s, the traditional connotations of polychrome ceramics and terracotta no longer held much interest. But the use of clay by artists like Fontana and Melotti opened the door for further exploration of humble, immediate substances. The wedge between the fine and decorative arts returned in the late post-war period, but perhaps more significantly, the debate no longer seemed to matter much amongst vanguard artists. The goal of establishing a uniquely Italian and internationally respected modernism had been achieved, and there were now new debates and new tendencies to explore. Just as it had been before and after the Second World War in Italy, however, the 1960s were not so much a total break as a fascinating, complex continuation. The sculptural projects of the next Italian avant-garde, Arte Povera, exemplified by Janis Kunelis' horses, Giovanni Anselmo's wilting lettuce, and Mario Mertz's dirt and glass igloos, may seem to have little in common with Melotti or Fontana's ceramic figures of the late 1940s. But such work indicated a new dialect more than a new language. The next generation of Italian artists used and augmented many of the tactics Fontana and Melotti developed in the 1940s and 1950s. In the late 1960s, Fontana, alongside those artists associated with Arte Povera, openly embraced collaboration with commercial and industrial entities, working alongside engineers, industrial designers, architects, and art dealers, just as his ceramic projects has depended on the assistance of figures like Ponti in the preceding decades. More than anything, the artists of the 1960s sustained the spirit of experimentation that informed so much of the ceramic output in the post-war period. Italian artists remained committed to pushing forward the medium of sculpture through an intense and unrelenting investigation of materiality. The Italian encounter with clay and ceramics in the immediate post-war period may have been a brief and at times messy mixture of contradictory stances, but it produced a new model for artistic process based on the possibilities of radical, dynamic experimentation with material. Thank you.